All right. Hello. Welcome back. I am Ted Knutson, and we are on the second show of our variance betting for the 2024 season. I am a former professional sports bettor who also helped rebuild one of the world's largest offshore bookies. I built the foundations for the Premier League team Brentford and their Moneyball journey from League One up into the league. And I also built one of the world's biggest and best sports data companies in StatsBomb. Now, we're here weekly to share my bets with you in the Premier League and then also in the English Championship. Last week was not so good, but it was nice to come back to get a slap in the face, I guess. We had Bournemouth miss a penalty against Chelsea that cost us a result. Spurs had a goal that probably should have been disallowed that conceded off a set piece against Arsenal. It's not by judgment. I am a set piece coach, but it just seemed like that was probably the fair way to go about it. Anyway, it's nice to be back. If you like our content, you can find us on TheTransferFlow.com/subscribe. We do sort of during the transfer season, we do daily analysis of the rumors. We try and give you smart information about what's actually happening in the world, whether things make sense, whether they're just terrible ideas, which happens occasionally. And we also talk about director football. We talk about gossip. We have a podcast that's also on this channel that you've seen. And people seem to genuinely love it as some of the best smart analytical football content around. We also have launched the Variance Betting premium upgrade on that newsletter. You will receive our stuff earlier and faster than on the web. And you will also receive stuff that never comes onto YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter as well at Mixed Canuts. I put out some Champions League thoughts this week. So anyway, if you're interested in the content, there's more than enough to go around. Now, on with some discussion about closing line value. So I got an email this week, and for those of you who were following along last week, our bets lost, but in some cases they felt like they were pretty good, and they would have been what we call plus EV, which is plus expected value. That's usually a decent indicator to say that, if you continue to do this over the long term, you will win more than you lose in your betting journey. But there's another way to look at that type of stuff. So I received this email from somebody who was paying attention, who presumably is in the gambling industry. And they said, just looking at your closing line value for week one, I see Bournemouth, Spurs, Brighton, Leeds, Millwall, Sunderland, all materially good, with Leicester and Forest pretty flat. I assume there's some run good there, and you're not just that far ahead of the game. Anyway, safe to say I'm glad I signed up. So first of all, if you want to talk to us, and me in particular, you can comment in the comments, or you can send replies to the emails that you receive from the TransferFlow. This is a really good point to talk about because it's not the be-all and end-all of betting. And in fact, at some point we'll talk about contrarian betting that I've seen as well. But it's a pretty useful indicator that you might have a clue. So closing line value is effectively what did the line close at in any particular game. So say that it starts out at minus 105, minus 105 or 0.95, 0.95. And then it moves on the side that you bet to say 0.80. So that's in many cases, I guess a 15 to 20 cent move. You'd actually be able to bet the other side of that on the other team if you're betting at a discount book at a profit. So you'd be able to cash out of your bet with zero risk at a profit if your line value movement is that good. Now, in areas that have pretty good understanding of the markets and the teams and the quality of them, it's hard to do. Lines don't move that often. But what you can do is you can look at your whole group of lines that you're betting, and you can evaluate the sharpness of your bet versus the wisdom of the markets by comparing the closing line value to what you actually bet. If you get better prices than the CLV, you're probably on the same side of sharp action in that game, especially if it moves significantly before post. If the market is moving against you regularly, that means you might be a square, which is sort of gambling parlance for just your average basic bettor or worse. And potentially you're on the wrong side of the smart money. Now, this doesn't always mean anything. Sometimes there's massive amounts of money that comes into a market and the line moves a ton to try and right action and limit the risk on the other side. There are times when Floyd Mayweather decides he wants to get down $1 million or $2 million on a game, and the market is not set up to handle that, and so the line moves a bunch just to find action on the other side. If you know that Floyd's bad, then you can take that action if you potentially can lose it. But the worry, and there's endless gambling stories about things like this, but the worry is always that someone like Phil Ivey, who's one of the world's greatest edge players and edge finders, is actually making a bet through Floyd Mayweather or someone like it. That's a story for a different day, but effectively, if you've got great CLV, you can lock in profit. Locking in profit isn't a recommended strategy if we're kind of doing our own long-term betting. And the reason why is because the expected value of your wager is probably better than the cash out value of that lock-in. But it's a viable option, especially if you're trying to limit risk. If you knew that you always had good closing line value, you could probably overbet the side that you thought was going to move toward, and then cash out half of that in order to lock in some profit. But again, like these are all strategies that are a little more advanced and they don't always pay off for you. And sometimes you end up in a really sticky spot where you have to flush away a bunch of money to get rid of that. So that's not what we'll be doing. I'm just giving you examples of things that could be done or have been done by other people in the past. Now, why does closing line value matter here? So despite losing overall last week, our closing line value was very strong across almost all of our bets. And that's a decent indicator that we might have a clue if that's sustained over the long run. Another thing to be aware of is it also might be an indication that I have a similar process in evaluating games to the smart hedge funds, which makes sense because I used to work alongside of one. And so it's not unheard of that we could be betting in the same way that some of the world's best gambling syndicates also bet. And if we're betting before them, that means that, we're sort of front running their potential money. Now, I don't know anything about anybody's bets. These are all my own analysis, all my own wagers. We do 2 different models if you followed us from last week, and we'll put the link to last week in there so you can get kind of our principles and our concepts around what we're doing. But we use 2 different models and analysis in the early season to really try and figure out what the sides are. Anyway, this is all despite the fact that we lost last week, which, if you're a professional sports bettor, 55% is a pretty awesome win rate on sort of even bets. You're going to lose a lot. and streaks of losing also happen, and they suck, but you get up and you do it again next week. Right, so we're going to jump into some game analysis here. The first match we're going to talk about is West Ham versus Chelsea. If you were following last week, you know that we learned that West Ham are pretty bad. And there are no real signs that they're getting better at the moment. They're also missing Fulkrug with a potential Achilles problem. And Achilles is like very touch and go and might be, a long-term issue for him. So if he's missing and if he's out, and even if he's in, he might not be able to play it at full strength. Like that's their 30 million pound striker that they bought in the summer sitting on the sideline. So Chelsea probably should have lost last week. And we learned that as well. Evan Nielsen missed a penalty. Chelsea had a late goal, but there's some signs of life in the second half of that game. Jadon Sancho seemed to definitely be frisky, and Chelsea have talent. So West Ham have lacked structure against worse teams than Chelsea. I'm not sure if Maresca is good yet, but if he is, this is where it should start to show. Like West Ham are at home, sure, but again, we haven't really seen them be competent even. They look like they could be a potential relegation struggler team, despite the fact they spent a bunch of money this summer. And until they show those signs of life, like this is kind of a decent lean on Chelsea. I'm not often super excited to be, betting them at, a half goal in an away game, but I do feel like this is the spot where you do it. So first bet this week is on Chelsea -0.5, and that's the American odds at +105. But we also have included, based off of reader feedback, the decimal odds. So on this one, you kind of subtract 1 because you're always getting your stake back. Hong Kong odds would be like 0.86, 1.05. But hopefully you're comfortable in looking at this format. We're on Chelsea in the first match. Second match, Aston Villa versus Wolves. Villa put up a 3 spot against Young Boys on on the weekday. So midweek Champions League stuff. And Kim and I both sort of previewed that a little bit. I did it on Twitter/X and Kim did it in the newsletter. Did not think that Young Boys had been very good this week, so far this year. Villa are elite at set pieces as well. And I was looking at the analysis. I was looking at the stats behind them. I was looking at each game. Like John Duran is scoring some crazy goals, and that's probably not sustainable, but he might also be pretty good at other types of goals. And Looking at the analysis and the numbers, I feel like for the first time in a long time, this Emery team might actually have a good attack. Now, that's usually a spot where we get jinxed and things go horribly awry. And Villa also played midweek, so they have been playing matches. They're not like fully fresh, but it feels like a spot where we know Wolves are bad and probably relegation candidates. Villa feel like they might have solidified themselves as an actual Champions League team. I feel like that's the right place to bet. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to next bet is on Aston Villa, and we will go from there. Third game this week. Okay, so Fulham versus Newcastle. I did the post-match roundup or the post-weekend roundup with Patrick. You can listen to that podcast. I also did it in the newsletter. Newcastle have 10 points so far on the table. That looks like one of those places where Newcastle could potentially be Champions League teams again, as they were, was it 2 years ago? But they've not been great, and their expected goals numbers are pretty miserable. And they're potentially missing Alexander Isak with a toe injury. Toe injuries are also problematic. So Fulham showed some signs of life last week. Felt like they probably should have come away with more than just a draw at home. They're home again this week. I might be happier if someone had gifted me a quarter goal to be able to play with that. But even at Pick'em or a zero handicap, I like Fulham here. And so I would be on their side. Sometimes it's nice to be on the home sides regularly, I guess. Not always the thing that I'm able to do, but so we like Fulham here. Don't think Newcastle are nearly as good as their table position, and that's a good spot to potentially pick up some free value. Moving right along, we have the pillow fight at King Power. We've got Leicester versus Everton. We know that Leicester are a promoted team. The market implied model doesn't really understand whether they're good or not. We don't have enough data to feel like that's a comfortable read on that. Everton are a mess. They have been a mess. And the thing that makes them particularly messy is they have given up 3 goals against every team they played. So, and sometimes they gave it up very late. They've been able to score 2 goals a couple of different times as well. So their matches are weirdly open for Sean Dyche matches. He must be pulling the very last of his hair out. The market implied feels a little bit like Everton are okay. It's fairly neutral. So it's starting to recover the fact that Everton have not been great. Leicester, we were on last week against Crystal Palace. I feel like they're not bad. There are probably 5 teams in the league so far that have looked worse than Leicester. And so given that they're at home, given that Everton are weird, I'm all right with being on the pick'em or the zero handicap. And the other thing that I liked in this match is I liked over 2.5. And a lot of that is simply given the fact that Everton matches don't seem to be very defensive at all. If you can't defend, then you have to score in order to potentially walk away with a result in the game. So I actually like the over there. Now, often, I mean, that total feels so low that I'm shocked that it's on the board. Clearly, this will be a 0-0 tense draw, much like the Brighton Ipswich game was last week, where I was also on the over. But we'll see how it goes. Okay, and the last one on this page and this piece of analysis is Southampton versus Ipswich. So if Leicester versus Everton was the pillow fight at King Power, this could be like dodgeball with giant marshmallows or something. These two teams are 2 of the weakest teams in the league. If you were following the analysis last week, especially the post-match analysis, you know that Southampton have not proven to be functional in almost any of their games. They had a good first 35 minutes against Manchester United and then completely fell apart. And they fell apart against Nottingham Forest as well. Nothing about Southampton says that they're very good right now. Now, nothing about Ipswich also says that they're great right now, but they've shown signs of being not terrible. I want to bet this for a variety of reasons. So Ipswich have actually had the toughest schedule of any team so far. They had City, Arsenal, and Brighton. Despite that, they seem like they're okay. I think their coach is pretty good. They're more okay than Everton and Wolves and West Ham. That's all right. And also almost certainly more okay than Southampton. So if you're going to give me a quarter goal, which means that if Ipswich draw, we win half of our bet, and Ipswich win, we win all of our bet. I'm going to take that. And I think that until Southampton look like they can both attack and defend for two halves of a game, I will happily sort of bet against them at reasonable numbers anyway. So that wraps up the initial bit. Give me just a second to take a drink and a breath, and we will be back with the next set of wagers. It's kind of a very busy wagering weekend, which feels both exciting and terrifying. Hopefully it goes well for us. And we're back. Okay, so busy day. We've got 2 Sunday games. We're still working through the Saturday schedule. We've got Liverpool versus Bournemouth. Liverpool, if you've been listening to the pods, if you've been reading the newsletters, we think that they're good defensively. They played midweek. They had a nice result against AC Milan. We suggested that was also a pretty favorable wager in the Champions League, even though we didn't put out a CL wagering column this week. So that felt pretty good. So we like Liverpool. Like, we're not against Liverpool in any way. Bournemouth are pretty good as well. Like, not, I mean, when I say pretty good, like, I mean pretty good for Bournemouth. So this is more like a 12th to 15th ranking for them. Definitely should have put up a result against Chelsea last week. And there's 2 factors going on here. So we like Liverpool. We think they're very good defensively. We kind of like Bournemouth. We don't necessarily think Liverpool are capable of just, generating a ton of goals right now, especially given they've had a pretty busy block of games and matches and coming off an international break. Last weekend, we saw a similar thing against Nottingham Forest. So it's not to say that we don't think that Liverpool are reasonably likely to win this game, but if you're going to give me 1.75, which means that if Bournemouth lose by 2 goals, you only lose half your bet. And if Bournemouth lose by more than 2 goals, it sucks and you lose all of it. But if they lose by 1, then then it looks like then you'll win your whole bet. Or if they draw, or if they win. The other thing that I liked in this game was the under. So the total here is 3.5. And I think this is, again, a bit of a legacy from last season's Liverpool, where they were pretty rampant and their games were pretty open. I don't see any indication that they are going to allow a lot of goals. If we don't think that they're going to cover a 2-goal spread here, or 1.75, and we don't think they're going to allow a lot of goals, then the under 3.5 also makes sense on this game. And I think that they sort of shut up shop. The question then is, if other teams aren't scoring a ton, why is that total so high? So I like the under on this. And my totals bets are usually half bets. I feel weaker on totals historically and lifetime. So they have to be like a bigger disparity than what I'm expecting. And this was pretty large. Moving on to the Spurs match. What to make of Spurs? They lost to Arsenal in the North London derby. At home, they lost to an Arsenal team that had 2 uncles in midfield. They are better than they used to be at set pieces, which would be a very bad thing to be bad against Brentford for. But they don't seem to have like a capable Champions League, Europa League quality midfield right now. And that's the issue that we're going into this match with. Spurs have pretty decent metrics overall, but the problem that I'm seeing is that they're decent metrics against weak sides. Brentford, on the other hand, are pretty good, actually, and their expected goals numbers are suffering a bit because they've played both City and Liverpool. I would have more concerns about their defensive numbers at the moment, but they faced City and Liverpool. Everybody is going to have some issues with those 2 teams. So when I look at Spurs and I look at Brentford, you combine the 2, there's nothing in either model to like really push for one side or the other. But I think that, given strength of schedule type information, I like Brentford at +1. And it's +1 with a positive VIG on it. So you're not paying extra VIG to get the +1 at the moment. I would bet this, I'd probably leave it alone at 0.75, but at +1, it feels like that's way too much value for us to not touch. Crystal Palace versus Manchester United. So it's a convenient time for United to face some dysfunctional teams, and they are still recovering from some injuries. They're still trying to figure out like which players should be where in that squad in order to play in a style that we would expect Manchester United to play. They put up 3-0 win at Southampton last week, which kind of if you took it on the surface just by the scoreline, you'd be like, oh wow, yeah, United took care of business, no problems whatsoever. If you watch the match, you know that Southampton missed a penalty in like the 35th minute. There was a set piece goal that was really nice design that De Ligt scored. There was also a seeing eye shot that happened to find the far post corner that Rashford hit, and then Southampton crumbled. I don't know what we learned from that really. Like it was a really good 7-minute stint from United after being pretty terrible for the first 35, and then they controlled the game for the rest of it with a late goal. So I still feel like United are a bit ropey. They're not consistent in almost anything they do. Crystal Palace, on the other hand, cannot defend. Giving up 14 shots a game in a high pressing system is not good. In fact, that is a design for giving up 2 goals a game and drawing or losing a lot. And I don't think that Palace are bad talent wise. I think that they've got some pretty good players, but I think that Glasner does not have a midfield that can function with his tactical system right now, and that's what's leading to a lot of shots, which was naturally leading to a lot of goals as well. I don't like either of these teams enough to put a wager on it. Yeah, I don't want anything to do with it. That's basically my answer. Crystal Palace last year, especially the back half of last season, this would have been an easy Palace bet. But right now, like until I've seen more that says that they can stop giving up 14, 15 shots a game against even reasonable teams, like I don't want anything to do with that. Moving on to the Sunday slate, we've got Brighton versus Forest first. Brighton are 3/4 goal favorites at home against Nottingham Forest. That line has no value in it either way for me. All the models sort of seem to indicate that, yeah, this is relatively fair. Maybe there's a small lean toward Forest. Brighton have some players that are recovering from injury. I'm not sure like how much they're going to be bolstered. Seems like Forest are pretty clean injury-wise. So there's no real indications to say that this is different than what the models and the world says it should be. Brighton were super young last week, and I'm curious like if that's going to continue. They had like a ton of 20-year-olds and 19-year-olds that saw playing time, which is again very unusual. Also be interesting to see if they fatigue over time, because that's something that happens with younger players if they get a lot of match runouts. Forests are tough to play against, so I don't want anything to do with this. I would leave it alone. Finally, you hit the big match, the late game on Sunday, and it's the sort of clash of the first place team from last season and the second place team from last season. Last year, City barely pipped Arsenal to the title. Arsenal managed to keep it like just so close until right at the end of the year, but City ended up winning out. This year, Arsenal have not been great. Part of that was there was a red card game. Part of it is their midfield. Rice was suspended for the match after that against Spurs, so they just tried to lock things up. Odegaard is injured for potentially a couple of months. Mikel Merino, who they brought in to help bolster the midfield, is out with a fractured shoulder. That midfield against Spurs, it took 2 players to do what Declan Rice did. Now, Rice may be back, but Odegaard's still gone. We're not sure that they can score against Manchester City. Maybe there's a set-piece goal in it, maybe not. They got that against Spurs. The models really like City here, and if the models really like City and you don't feel like there's a good reason to override this, you have to bet City. And that line could run by a quarter goal if the big gambling hedge funds decide to get behind it as well. So yeah, I would get on City here. I don't have like a really strong personal feeling. I have worries about that Arsenal midfield, and also have worries about them chasing a game ever. And City have the ability to just score and then put up 1 or 2 more and kill a game. So, if this was like a 1.25, like it was against Milan in midweek in the Champions League, then you're like, okay, well, maybe I kind of like the dog on that. Cause like, I think Arsenal will be good defensively and be able to shut down, multiple goal loss potentially. That's the probabilistic view on it. But like, if you're only going to make me pay half a goal to be on City at home against almost anybody in the world, like, I'm not gonna turn that down unless it's maybe Real Madrid, maybe Barcelona right now. That'd be a fun match to watch. Hopefully, we get to see that in the Champions League this year. There's also an English Championship game tonight. When we cover this information on Variance Betting newsletter, we also cover Championship. The Championship information for me is going to start coming out on Saturday mornings because the VIG is different on game days for the championship, substantially different. And so it'll save some pennies being able to bet on that day versus trying to cover it early. There is a match tonight, Stoke versus Hull. I didn't really have any strong opinion about it. It seemed fair enough, so left that alone. So once again, my name is Ted Knudsen. I am the CEO of and sort of founder and content nerd of TheTransferFlow. You can find us at thetransferflow.com/subscribe. Variance Betting is our premium gambling newsletter focused on the Premier League, the Championship, and we'll start to do some Champions League from the next round. We cover market implied models. We give you the market implied model information inside of the newsletter. And we've had hundreds of people join up in the first week, which has been super exciting and like just this awesome vote of confidence for being out here talking about bets and analyzing things in a way that I've done for something like 20 years, but usually in a much more private fashion with a lot larger numbers behind the bets. But yeah, good luck in your betting this weekend. Have fun. And if you have any feedback, comment in the comments, like, subscribe, 5-star reviews, and definitely sign up for the newsletter. Take care.